Chapter 12. Antidotes for Fear. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. 1 John 4:18. In these days of catastrophic change, calamitous uncertainty, is there a man who does not experience the depression and bewilderment of crippling fear which, like a nagging hound of hell, pursues our every footstep? Everywhere, men and women are confronted by fears that often appear in strange disguises and a variety of wardrobes. Haunted by the possibility of bad health, we detect in every meaningless symptom an evidence of disease. Troubled by the fact that days and years pass so quickly, we dose ourselves with drugs that promise eternal youth. If we are physically vigorous, we become so concerned by the prospect of our personalities may collapse that we develop an inferiority complex and stumble through life with a feeling of insecurity, a lack of self-confidence, and a sense of impending failure. A fear of what life may bring encourages some persons to wander aimlessly along the frittering road of excessive drinking and sexual promiscuity. Almost without being aware of the change, many people have permitted fear to transform the sunrise of love and peace into a sunset of inner depression. When unchecked, fear spawns a whole brood of phobias: fear of water, high places, closed rooms, darkness, loneliness, among others, and such an accumulation culminates in phobia, or the fear of fear itself. Especially common in our highly competitive society are economic fears, from which, Karen Horney says, come most of the psychological problems of our age. Captains of industry are tormented by the possible failure of their business and the capriciousness of the stock market. Employees are plagued by the prospect of unemployment and the consequences of an ever-increasing automation. And consider, too, the multiplication in our day of religious and ontological fears, which include the fear of death and racial annihilation. The advent of the atomic age, which should have ushered in an era of plenty and prosperity, has lifted the fear of death to morbid proportions. The terrifying spectacle of nuclear warfare has put Hamlet's words, "to be or not to be," on millions of trembling lips. Witness our frenzied efforts to construct fallout shelters, as though even these offer sanctuary from an H-bomb attack. Witness the agonizing desperations of our petitions that our government increase the nuclear stockpile, but our fanatical quest to maintain a balance of terror only increases our fear and leaves nations on tiptoes lest some diplomatic faux pas ignite a frightful holocaust. Realizing that fear drains a man's energy and depletes his resources, Emerson wrote, "He has not learned the lesson of life who does not every day surmount a fear." But I do not mean to suggest that we should seek to eliminate fear altogether from human life. Were this humanly possible, it would be practically undesirable. Fear is the elemental alarm system of the human organism that warns of approaching dangers, and without which man could not have survived in either the primitive or modern worlds. Fear, moreover, is a powerfully creative force. Every great invention and intellectual advance represents a desire to escape from some dreaded circumstance or condition. The fear of darkness led to the discovery of the secret of electricity. The fear of pain led to the marvelous advances of medical science. The fear of ignorance was one reason that man built great institutions of learning. The fear of war was one of the forces behind the birth of the United Nations. Angelo Petri has rightly said, "Education consists in being afraid at the right time." If man were to lose his capacity to fear, he would be deprived of his capacity to grow, invent, and create. So, in a sense, fear is normal, necessary, and creative. But we must remember that abnormal fears are emotionally ruinous and psychologically destructive. To illustrate the difference between normal and abnormal fear, Sigmund Freud spoke of a person who was quite properly afraid of snakes in the heart of an African jungle, and of another person who was neurotically feared that snakes were under the carpet in his city apartment. Psychologists say that normal children are born with only two fears: fear of falling and the fear of loud noises, and that all others are environmentally acquired. Most of these acquired fears are snakes under the carpet. It is to such fears that we usually refer when we speak of getting rid of fear, but this is only part of the story. Normal fear protects us. Abnormal fear paralyzes us. Normal fear motivates us to improve our individual and collective welfare. Abnormal fear consistently poisons and distorts our inner lives. Our problem is not to be rid of fear, but rather to harness and master it. How may it be mastered? Part 1. First, we must unflinchingly face our fears and honestly ask ourselves why we are afraid. This confrontation will, to some measure, grant us power. We shall never be cured of fear by escapism or repression, for the more we attempt to ignore and repress our fears, the more we multiply our inner conflicts. By looking squarely and honestly at our fears, we learn that many of them are residues of some childhood need or apprehension. Here, for instance, is a person haunted by a fear of death or the thought of punishment in the afterlife, who discovers that he has unconsciously projected into the whole of reality the childhood experience of being punished by parents, locked in a room and unseemingly deserted. Or here is a man plagued by the fear of inferiority and social rejection, who discovers that rejection in childhood by a self-centered mother and a preoccupied father left him with a self-defeating sense of inadequacy and a repressed bitterness towards life. By bringing our fears to the forefront of consciousness, we may find them to be more imaginary than real. Some of them will turn out to be snakes under the carpet. And let us also remember that, more often than not, fear involves the misuse of the imagination. When we get our fears into the open, we may laugh at some of them, and this is good. One psychiatrist said, "Ridicule is the master cure for fear and anxiety." Part 2. Second, we can master fear through one of the supreme virtues known to man: courage. Plato considered courage to be an element of the soul that bridges the cleavage between reason and desire. Aristotle thought of courage as the affirmation of man's essential nature. Thomas Aquinas said that courage is the strength of mind capable of conquering whatever threatens the attainment of the highest good. Courage, therefore, is the power of the mind to overcome fear. Unlike anxiety, fear has a definite object that may be faced, analyzed, attacked, and if need be, endured. How often the object of our fear is fear itself. In his journal, Henry David Thoreau wrote, "Nothing is so much to be feared as fear." Centuries earlier, Epictetus wrote, "For it is not death or hardship that is a fearful thing, but the fear of hardship and death." Courage takes the fear produced by a definite object into itself and thereby conquers the fear involved. Paul Tillich has written, "Courage is self-affirmation in spite of that which tends to hinder the self from affirming itself." It is self-affirmation in spite of death and non-being, and he who is courageous takes the fear of death into self-affirmation and acts upon it. This courageous self-affirmation, which is surely a remedy for fear, is not selfishness. For self-affirmation includes both a proper self-love and a proper propositioned love of others. Erich Fromm has shown in convincing terms that the right kind of self-love and the right kind of love of others is interdependent. Courage the determination not to be overwhelmed by any object, however frightful, enables us to stand up to any fear. Many of our fears are not mere snakes under the carpet. Trouble is a reality in this strange medley of life. Dangers lurk within the circumference of every action. Accidents do occur. Bad health is an everlasting possibility, and death is a stark, grim, and inevitable fact of human existence. Evil and pain in this conundrum of life are close to each other, and we do both ourselves and our neighbors a great disservice when we attempt to prove that there is nothing in this world of which we should be frightened. These forces that threaten to negate life must be challenged by courage, which is the power of life to affirm itself in spite of life's ambiguities. This requires the exercise of a creative will that enables us to hew out a stone of hope from a mountain of despair. Courage and cowardice are antithetical. Courage is an inner resolution to go forward in spite of obstacles and frightening situations. Cowardice is a submissive surrender to circumstance. Courage breeds creative self-affirmation. Cowardice produces destructive self-abnegation. Courage faces fear and thereby masters it. Cowardice represses fear and is thereby mastered by it. Courageous men never lose the zest for living, even though their life situation is zestless. Cowardly men, overwhelmed by the uncertainties of life, lose the will to live. We must constantly build dikes of courage to hold back the flood of fear. Part 3. Third, fear is mastered through love. The New Testament affirms, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear." The kind of love that led Christ to a cross and kept Paul unembittered amid the angry torrents of persecution is not soft, anemic, and sentimental. Such love confronts evil without flinching and shows in our popular parlance an infinite capacity to take it. Such love overcomes the world, even from a rough-hewn cross against the skyline. But does love have a relationship to our modern fear of war, economic displacement, and racial injustice? Hate is rooted in fear, and the only cure for fear-hate is love. Our deteriorating international situation is shot through with the lethal darts of fear. Russia fears America, and America fears Russia. Likewise, China and India, and the Israelis and the Arabs. These fears include another nation's aggression, scientific and technological supremacy, and economic power, and our own loss of status and power. Is not fear one of the major causes of war? We say that war is a consequence of hate, but close scrutiny reveals this sequence. First fear, then hate, then war, and finally deeper hatred. Were a nightmarish nuclear war to engulf our world, the cause would be not so much that one nation hated another, but that both nations feared each other. What method has the sophisticated ingenuity of modern man employed to deal with the fear of war? We have armed ourselves to a 9th degree. The West and the East have engaged in a fever-pitched arms race. Expenditures for defense have risen to mountainous proportions, and weapons of destruction have been assigned priority over all other human endeavors. The nations have believed that greater armaments will cast out fear, but alas, they have produced greater fear. In these turbulent, panic-stricken days, we are once more reminded of the judicious words of old. Perfect love casteth out fear. Not arms, but love, understanding, and organized goodwill can cast out fear. Only disarmament, based on good faith, will make mutual trust a living reality. Our own problem of racial injustice must be solved by the same formula. Racial segregation is buttressed by such irrational fears as loss of preferred economic privilege, altered social status, intermarriage, and adjustment to new situations. Through sleepless nights and haggard days, numerous white people attempt to combat these corroding fears by diverse methods. By following the path of escape, some seek to ignore the question of race relations and to close their mind to the issues involved. Others, placing their faith in such legal maneuvers as interposition and nullification, counsel massive resistance. Still, others hope to drown their fear by engaging in acts of violence and meanness towards their Negro brethren. But how futile are all these remedies? Instead of eliminating fear, they instill deeper and more pathological fears that leave the victims inflicted with strains, psychoses, and peculiar cases of paranoia. Neither repression, massive resistance, nor aggressive violence will cast out the fear of integration. Only love and goodwill can do that. If our white brothers are to master fear, they must depend not only on their commitment to Christian love, but also on the Christ-like love that the Negro generates toward them. Only through our adherence to love and nonviolence will the fear in the white community be mitigated. A guilt-ridden white minority fears that if the Negro obtains power, he will, without restraint or pity, act to revenge the accumulated injustices and brutality of the years. A parent who has continually mistreated his son suddenly realizes that he is now taller than the parents. Will the son use his new physical power to repay for all the blows of the past? Once a helpless child, the Negro has now grown politically, culturally, and economically. Many white men fear retaliation. The Negro must show them that they have nothing to fear, for the Negro forgives and is willing to forget the past. The Negro must convince the white man that he seeks justice for both himself and the white man. A mass movement exercising love and nonviolence and demonstrating power under discipline should convince the white community that were such a movement to obtain strength, its power would be used creatively and not vengefully. What then is the cure of this morbid fear of integration? We know the cure. God, help us achieve it. Love casts out fear. This truth is not without a bearing on our personal anxieties. We are afraid of the superiority of other people, of failure, and of the scorn or disapproval of those whose opinions we most value. Envy, jealousy, and a lack of self-confidence, a feeling of insecurity, and a haunting sense of inferiority are all rooted in fear. We do not envy people and then fear them. First, we fear them, and subsequently we become jealous of them. Is there a cure for these annoying fears that pervert our personal lives? Yes, a deep and abiding commitment to the way of love. Perfect love casteth out fear. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. Hatred paralyzed life. Love releases it. Hatred confuses life. Love harmonizes it. Hatred darkens life. Love illuminates it. Part 4. Fourth, fear is mastered through faith. A common source of fear is an awareness of deficient resources and of a consequent inadequacy for life. All too many people attempt to face the tensions of life with inadequate spiritual resources. When vacationing in Mexico, Mrs. King and I wished to go deep-sea fishing. For reasons of economy, we rented an old and poorly equipped boat. We gave this little thought until 10 miles from shore the clouds lowered and howling winds blew. Then we became paralyzed with fear, for we knew our boat was deficient. Multitudes of people are in similar situations. Heavy winds and weak boats explain their fear. Many of our abnormal fears can be dealt with by the skills of psychiatry, a relative new discipline pioneered by Sigmund Freud, which investigates the subconscious drives of man and seeks to discover how and why fundamental energies are diverted into neurotic channels. Psychiatry helps us to look candidly at our inner selves and to search out the causes of our failure and fears. But much of our fearful living encompasses a realm where the service of psychiatry is ineffectual unless the psychiatrist is a man of religious faith. For our trouble is simply that we attempt to confront fear without faith. We sail through the stormy seas of life without adequate spiritual boats. One of the leading physicians in America has said the only known cure for fear is faith. Abnormal fears and phobias that are expressed in neurotic anxiety may be cured by psychiatry, but the fear of death, non-being, and nothingness expressed in existential anxiety may be cured only by a positive religious faith. A positive religious faith does not offer an illusion that we shall be exempt from pain and suffering, nor does it imbue us with the idea that life is a drama of unalloyed comfort and untroubled ease. Rather, it instills with the inner equilibrium needed to face strains, burdens, and fears that inevitably come, and assures us that the universe is trustworthy and that God is concerned. Irreligion, on the other hand, would have us believe that we are orphans cast into the terrifying immensities of space in an universe that is without purpose or intelligence. Such a view drains courage and exhausts the energies of men. In his Confession, Tolstoy wrote concerning the aloneness and emptiness he felt before his conversion. There was a period in my life when everything seemed to be crumbling. The very foundations of my convictions were beginning to give way, and I felt myself going to pieces. There was no sustaining influence in my life, and there was no God there. And so every night before I went to sleep, I made sure there was no rope in my room lest I be tempted during the night to hang myself from the rafters in my room. And I stopped from going out shooting lest I be tempted to put a quick end to my life and to my misery. Like so many people, Tolstoy at that stage of his life lacked the sustaining influence that comes from the conviction that this universe is guided by a benign intelligence whose infinite love embraces all mankind. Religion endows us with the conviction that we are not alone in this vast, uncertain universe. Beneath and below the shifting sands of time, the uncertainties that darken our days, and the vicissitudes that cloud our night is a wise and loving God. This universe is not a tragic expression of meaningless chaos, but a marvelous display of orderly cosmos. The Lord by wisdom hath founded the earth, by understanding hath he established the heavens. Man is not a wisp of smoke from a limitless smoldering, but a child created a little lower than the angels. Above the manyness of time stands the one eternal God, with wisdom to guide us, strength to protect us, and love to keep us. His boundless love supports and contains us as a mighty ocean contains and supports the tiny drops of every wave. With a surging fullness, he is forever moving towards us, seeking to fill the little creeks and bays of our lives with unlimited resources. This is religion's everlasting diapason, its eternal answer to the enigma of existence. Any man who finds this cosmic substance can walk the highway of life without the fatigue of pessimism and the weight of morbid fears. Herein lies the answer to the neurotic fear of death that plagues so many of our lives. Let us face the fear that the atomic bomb has aroused with the faith that we can never travel beyond the arms of the divine. Death is inevitable. It is a democracy for all the people, not an aristocracy for some of the people. Kings die and beggars die. Young men die and old men die. Learned men die and ignorant men die. We need not fear it. The God who brought out whirling planet from primordial vapor has led the human pilgrimage for lo, these many centuries can most assuredly lead us through dark death's night into the bright daylight of eternal life. His will is too perfect, and his purposes are too extensive to be contained in the limited receptacle of time and the narrow walls of earth. Death is not the ultimate evil. The ultimate evil is to be outside God's love. We need not join the mad rush to purchase an earthly fallout shelter. God is our eternal fallout shelter. Jesus knew that nothing could separate man from his love of God. Listen to his majestic words. Fear them not, therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known. And fear them not which kills the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. But the very hairs on your head are all numbered. Fear ye not, therefore, ye are more valuable than many sparrows. Man, for Jesus, is not mere flotsam and jetsam in the river of life, but he is a child of God. It is not unreasonable to assume that God, whose creative activity is expressed in an awareness of the sparrow's fall and the numbers of hair on a man's head, excludes from his encompassing love the life of man itself. The confidence that God is mindful of the individual is of tremendous value in dealing with the disease of fear, for it gives us a sense of worth, of belonging, and of at-homeness in the universe. One of the most dedicated participants in the bus protest in Montgomery, Alabama, was an elderly Negro whom we affectionately called Mother Pollard. Although poverty-stricken and uneducated, she was amazingly intelligent and possessed a deep understanding of the meaning of the movement. After having walked for several weeks, she was asked if she were tired. With ungrammatical profundity, she answered, "My feet is tired, but my soul is rested." On a particular Monday evening, following a tension-packed week that included being arrested and receiving numerous threatening phone calls, I spoke at a mass meeting. I attempted to convey an overt impression of strength and courage, although I was inwardly depressed and fear-stricken. At the end of the meeting, Mother Pollard came to the front of the church and said, "Come here, son." I immediately went to her and hugged her affectionately. "Something is wrong with you," she said. "You didn't talk strong tonight." Seeking further to disguise my fears, I retorted, "Oh no, Mother Pollard, nothing is wrong. I am feeling as fine as ever." But her insight was discerning. "Now you ain't fool me," she says. "I know something is wrong. Is it that we ain't doing things to please you? Or is it that the white folk is bothering you?" Before I could respond, she looked directly into my eyes and said, "I don't tell you we is with you all the way." Then her face became radiant, and she said in words of quiet certainty, "But even if we ain't with you, God's gonna take care of you." As she spoke these consoling words, everything in me quivered and quickened with the pulsating tremor of raw energy. Since that dreary night in 1956, Mother Pollard has passed on to glory, and I have known very few quiet days. I have been tortured without and tortured within by the raging fires of tribulation. I have been forced to muster what strength and courage I have to withstand howling winds of pain and jostling storms of adversity. But as the years have unfolded, the eloquently simple words of Mother Pollard have come back again and again to give light and peace and guidance to my troubled soul. God's gonna take care of you. This faith transforms the whirlwind of despair into a warm and reviving breeze of hope. The words of a motto that a generation ago were commonly found on the wall in homes of devout persons need to be etched onto our hearts. Fear knocked at the door. Faith answered. There was no one there.